point, I'd like to invite up all our other presenters, as well as one additional representative here. We have Sergio Gama, Director of Market Development for Power Control for Rockwell Automation. I'd like to invite Sergio up here to sit on the panel as well. And don't be shy. I think we have somebody passing a microphone around if you want to ask some questions or write some questions down on the paper that's provided on your table, and somebody will come and collect them and bring them up here. I know you're still awake out there, and some of you must have some questions, so please don't be shy. But I'd like to start the discussion. And I guess Sandy and Alexander, I'll start with you guys. If I'm an end user considering greater integration of my electrical assets or my motor control centers and drives with my process automation, which industries and or applications do you think make the most sense for this kind of approach, and how should I get started? Sandy, would you care to start?
I think it applies to all industries. Whoever's interested in streamlining execution, reducing kit, simplifying their designs. So I'm not sure it's limited to oil and gas or any of the industries.
Yeah, it's of course. For every industry is the same. The issue for the integration and the standardization for basically the Austrian facility is the part of the project we're working is because you don't have factory or a lot of engineering in the Austrian facility. The standardization from the factory in the city to the oil field is very important for this reason too. Because if you go to Africa and you develop the Austrian facility, how we can create equipment in this place because the people don't have knowledge about this. But of course, the integration now for all the industry is the same. Yeah. When we're talking about the PMM motors or induction motor, it's a reaction for all the market. If you identify now some process in cement industry, go to the PMM motor, for example. And who move the motor is the drive, yeah? And you need a standardized. One drive can you use for both solutions, induction and PMM. And for all the industry now, it's the same way. The standardization is the best model that the end user can take advantage over their competitors.
Anybody else care to comment on that, or?
I can get it right
Sure.
on that question. Actually, I'm a little embarrassed because I didn't present anything and ended up in the panel, but that's
don't
some
be
contribution, right? I took some notes in something that came in Sandy's presentation when he mentioned that in the current state, design input is provided piecemeal, and I think our experience tells us that if you're looking for an integrated system, your workflow is supposed to change, because in reality we all want the workflow to be more effective, more efficient, right? We want to reduce time, you want reduce probability for errors and other things. So you gotta keep in mind your end game. That now you may have to to work with your providers, with your integrators, with the manufacturers in a way that you get things moving in a different way. Because it's not about repeating things just as you did in the previous project. You gotta get now to understand that the direction now is take your workflow, your collaboration to change either a little bit or very significantly, depending on how ambitious you are in getting this integrated solution. Right. I think that's important. Yeah. Start with the as clear as possible vision of where you want to land in your project.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the workflow is much different. Stephen, did you want to comment on that as well? And we talked about the workflow and the work processes on the project side of things. And Sandy, you mentioned that some of maybe the traditional aspects of the steps of doing an electrical project might be eliminated by taking this kind of an approach. What interests me about this, and of course I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who's worked with field buses and intelligent devices for a long time, is on the operational and maintenance side of things. And it always seemed to be a sticking point with Field Bus. Once you get a project up and running, how do you get the maintenance technicians to actually use the technology and the predictive or the proactive diagnostics and so forth? So what do you think some of the primary challenges will be on the operational side of this?
Well, the first thing I'd say is when we pursue a different approach, the first activity is to sit down with the suppliers and tell them that this stuff has to be user-friendly. It can't be difficult to implement. It can't be difficult to support. It can't be difficult to operate. And so we need to look at every aspect of it and make sure we've done everything we can to make it as easy as possible. And then it's a training exercise to bring everybody up to speed on what we're gaining. I will tell you that in all of the things that we're trying to implement, there are some compromises that we're having to make in order to realize the big picture. And so it may mean some extra work in some areas, but we're trying to eliminate a significant amount of effort in the project execution, as well as simplify the installation so that there's less things for the operations folks to have to worry about. They may have to, there may be some technology that they'll have to learn about, but it won't be what we have today. And today we have lots and lots of components, a very, very complex architecture. And that's a whole lot harder to support than to say we've simplified it, but we have some technologies that folks need to be trained on to be able to support.
Larry, maybe I can also provide some input here.
Yeah.
So some of the most successful technology changes that I've experienced, mainly from the utility space, is when the utility had stakeholders of all the different aspects, whether it was the engineering, whether it was the field personnel that were chartered to maintain this. And what they did is they actually set up a mock system and brought them in early in the design and then used that as a training facility as they rolled this technology out. Again, I think it's the fear of the unknown, and by embracing this, the technology, and showing them the value, you get a much better, much faster changeover and buy-in.
Yeah, the important issue for the training is when you change the technology for the integration, you put other new feature in the marketplace, and the user have to move faster to receive the new technology. This is one complicated issue. And the other important for create new integration technology is not only checking the problem that we have today for this, is prepare the technology for the future too, because the change is faster. And when you create a technology very, very, very close, that you don't have flexibility for this integration, in the future it's more complicated adaptive this technology for the requiring the future. And this is important key with the new philosophy of design for the integrated architecture for electricity control, application, whatever. It's have some open place that you can move faster to adapt the technology for the requiring the future.
Very good. Do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, right over here. Yes. Yeah, please just tell us who you are for the question.
Scott Curley, ABB. This question is for Steve with your committee hat on. So as you said, 61850 is really a substation standard, so it works in the medium voltage world and so forth. Do you, or has there been any discussions at the committee level in terms of it going down to the low voltage arena? Do you see it sort of expanding in terms of the electrical space it addresses?
I think from an architecture perspective, it can be applied in any application. I think the challenge there on the low voltage side is getting the experts to actually define the models, these logical nodes, that need to be specific for that application. IEC 61850, since its inception in 2004, has expanded out. Like I said, wind or these distributed energy resources are now modeled in there. There's all kinds of other different applications that have extended. They've used the core from 61850, but then expanded them to the application. So yes, there is definitely the possibility, Scott.
Maybe we should ask you to answer that from the ABB perspective.
Well, I build the transmission system, so I don't know what's in the pipeline on the LV side.
And well, we've talked about 61850 in the context of switchgear and sort of heavy duty, electrical assets. And certainly 61850 isn't the only network technology out there to support devices, electrical type devices like drives and motor control centers, for example. So what's the difference between IEC 61850 and some of the other network technologies that are out there? And maybe you could shed some light on, from your vendor perspective, on how you're supporting maybe some other networks that support drives, motor control centers, things like that.
Sure. From a multiple protocol perspective, again, when we talk about the protocol, TCP/IP is what 61850 has. We know that DMP or Modbus can be tunneled over DMP or over TCP. So from that perspective, you can have mixed protocols running in the same Ethernet network. So that should not be an issue. I think the challenge comes into play that these other applications, whether it's a field bus, you need to know the specific domain end use, the sensor, what it's connected to, and the application needs to understand that. From a 61850 perspective, it's defined. So if you're talking to a logical node at this endpoint, you know exactly what it is. There may be some optional attributes in there that can be supported by one manufacturer or the other. But this is where the interoperability comes into play.
If I could get it right there in his answer, I copied from with all due respect, I copied from a presentation, right? You mentioned there 61850 is a process, I could say application-oriented data model, right? So, and just as like he described, the data objects you find today, they are very specifically tailored for the power station automation, right? But in the application, in the automation side, you got people that wants to speed up and slow down drives, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is going to require a very different type of data object, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to have the process control instrumentation. The data objects are going to be different, right? Happily, fortunately, everybody can live in the same infrastructure because this ends up like being services, right? Or the same TCP/IP backbone, mm-hmm. which at least gives the benefit for the user that he's making just one investment in communication infrastructure, right? And then he will take his preferred protocol based on the service, on the type of device he's trying to control today. Mm-hmm. But there is a very clear difference driven by the type of application you're trying to solve and the type of communication objects you'll be exchanging across the network.
Just one comment back on top of that. So from an applications perspective, I mean, ABB, we can use 61850 to control motors, no doubt. Okay. But the question is, because 61850 allows for the extension of logical nodes and customized logical nodes, the challenge comes, it's against the standard because we want interoperability and having a standard defined logical node that vendor A, vendor B can be interchanged, okay, with some re-engineering. It's not, but they're also interoperable.
Okay. Is there some kind of an interoperability testing facility that will ensure this, or is that up to the vendors, or how is that handled with 61850?
In 61850 Part 10 is the conformity part of the standard. And there are certification labs. KEMA is a certification center. The UCA actually has the test process. UCA is Utility Communication Architecture. It's a users group that has the process on how to actually go and certify a lab and this lab and then certify your product to the standard. Okay, one important thing to note, just because you have this certificate that says you conform, read the print. It says, this device has not been found to be non-conforming, certainly written by somebody legal. Okay, this is where, testing your system out ahead of time is also a very important part.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I think we have another question over here.
Larry, thanks. Rick Dolezal with ABB. Sandy, I have a question for you. I was intrigued with your standardization and procurement optimization plan. And I'm curious, do you think it always has to come from the purchaser to the vendor? Or if the vendor had said to you, we'd like to implement this, what would your response have been? Do you think it's always got to come from your side back to the vendor?
You mean in terms of the specs that we created?
In terms of saying, this is what we want to implement right now, are you guys on board?
So-
Because we have other people that buy from us that, boy, I'd love to put that in place for them and would love to be successful in doing that. So I'm curious what you might have responded to had a company like us said, we want to do this. I think it makes sense. We'd like it everywhere.
We would have been supportive. So we sat down with each of our key suppliers, and the one key to that whole discussion was we didn't start from our global practice. We didn't want to start there. We wanted to start from the supplier's standard solution. We want to get as close to their standard solution as we can. Closer we can get to it, the lower the cost will be. We'll minimize the amount of customization that takes place on every job. It minimizes the amount of FATs that we have to do to validate the customization. And so we're trying to get to a standard solution. Now, if there's a gap that we saw when we discussed with each of the suppliers, we pointed out that gap. And now we're going to spend some time trying to convince that supplier it needs to be a standard solution. So in the end, we want to be able to order by part number. No longer will we even need the spec. We'll order by part number because it's already agreed up front exactly what we're going to get. And all that will be needed, as I pointed out, is a data sheet to talk about the architecture or to talk about something that's very unique to the project. If we're building in Russia, then it has to meet Russian regs. If it's a marine package on a vessel, then we've got to make sure it meets all the marine regs. Those kinds of things would show up in the data sheet. But that's what we want to get to. And it's been a big change for us to do that. For a long, long time, I've been a big proponent of our global practices. I think we invested a significant amount of time developing those things. And I could probably justify every paragraph that's in there. Unfortunately, the result is a highly engineered, extremely customized solution that nobody can meet. And that there's always changes that have to be discussed and agreed to for every project. We're just wasting time. And so, as I pointed out earlier, we made some compromises. There's probably some things that we gave in on that we probably otherwise wouldn't have. But we were trying to get to this final solution where we can order by part number, and we were never going to get there if we stuck to every single requirement that we had in our standard. We want to make sure it's safe, and we want to make sure it's operable, and we want to make sure it's as close to the standard supply as we can get.
So close to the standard, have a lot of communication, and try to make it efficient for both sides.
Yes.
Great response. And I guess this is another one for Sandy and anyone else that wants to respond. And I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. Are the vendors going to have smart I/O offerings for electrical, like we've seen in the process control world with configurable I/O and characterizable I/O? When do you think we're going to see a similar thing for electrical assets?
So what we've done is that we've sat down with all of our electrical suppliers and we identified what the objectives are. And we've offered the idea of smart I/O contained within the gear as a solution. And we're going to implement something somehow. If it's not part of the gear, it's going to be sitting right next to the gear. And so we're going to implement something. And so we're encouraging the suppliers to either adopt that or to come up with a different solution that accomplishes the same objectives. So we're trying to get this implemented on our next projects. So we've got some fairly major projects that are coming up. And these things are either committed to by the suppliers or on the roadmap to be supplied in some form or fashion. So our projects are lengthy, so they're 6 years in duration. So I guess I could say that within 6 years we'll have something. But hopefully there'll actually be a solution for others to use much earlier than that.
Yeah, I know we're, and here's the chance for any vendors that want to drop a bomb here and tell us that the new product is on the way, but I'm not sure what our representatives from the vendor community can say about this right now, but.
Well,
Probably not
I have the
much.
mic, so, so yes, we have Smart I/O. That's
Okay.
available today and supporting 61850.
Okay, okay. Last question, unless we have another question from the audience. I don't want to leave
There's one back
anybody
there.
out here. Do we have one back there?
One.
Ah. Oh, okay. So if I'm an end user and I'm about to embark on one of these projects where I'm integrating my electrification and trying to make things less complicated and drive out some of these traditional steps in the project, what are some key pieces of advice that you would have for a user that's embarking on one of these projects right now?
So first thing is you need to talk with everybody that's involved in the project. And it's not just the project team or the project leadership. You have to talk with the procurement organization. You have to talk with our contracts group. We have to talk with the folks that do the strategies for our contract strategies. So that's the first thing. Internally, we have to make sure everybody is aligned. The next thing we try to do is to actually sit down with EPCs, not specific to a project, but just in general, to talk to them about the concepts so that we've rolled that out. And then, meeting with our suppliers to get them all on board on where we're trying to go with all of this. And then meeting at events like this where we're sharing it publicly. But it won't come easy. And so what we've done on specific projects is that we put our very best people on the projects to act as the champions for these technologies. There has to be somebody within the project team that will take this on as a champion. And so we're putting our very best on the project to act as that champion. And we're assisting them wherever we can to help make it through all the processes. But
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I like it. And once you have defined your vendor, your final solution, it's very important to engage your operation staff in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So they understand what the benefits are, what the advantages are, what are the things they should be ready to learn, right? And why they should put an effort to learn compared to the benefits they're going to get, even because the operation is going to become more efficient or it's going to become safer, right? With all this remote data access, you probably will have lower exposure to the electrical part, so you're going to have a much safer, easier operation. And putting the advantages to the operational staff will probably make wonders in going them through the learning curve, through the change management much faster, right? And that's something that's important. At the end of the day, all this efficiency should translate in a better work environment for the plant, for those that work in the facility.
Right,
and it's important to let them know this up front, right? And not get them to have just screens changing or diagrams changing without explaining where is the benefit for the company and for them at the end of the day.
So that's really important. I'm sorry I missed that. We have it's part of the technology rollout and actually the review of the specifics of the technology. We have operations participation in all of that. And so whenever we send out an email about what we're doing next, we get an email from the technical staff as well in operations, as well as the actual folks that operate the facility saying, we buy into this, this is exactly what we want to do.
Alexander, would you care to comment on that? Some maybe key elements of project success?
No, the Sandy said is the operation people have the last decision for the new standardization technology. Okay, and the other important issue that he said that, and we are full agree with this, is that we have to use a standard product for the champion supplier too. If you want to the standardization volume, it's mandatory use a standard product for the catalog number for the supplier, for the manufacturing for the supplier. If you create a special equipment, it's more complicated in the future. Take a good price, massive technology, and additional expert and something like that. Because the more important issue in the case for oil and gas business is that you have to move all your knowledge in the global marketplace. You don't create only technology for the oil field in Canada or oil field in US or a specific oil field in Venezuela. You create standardization technology for all the oil field. And it's important the standard product and the standard solution that you can buy the same BSD supplier catalog number drive in Russia, in China, in Africa, in South America, in Canada, in North America. This is an important key issue for the standardization, a standard product for the champion supplier. This is my point of view.
Yeah, I think it's important too because we obviously were faced with a worker resource shortage. So standardizing across the board, worldwide like that can also make things a lot easier for those employees that might not be as experienced or have these 20 or 30 years of, a field experience, which are seemingly increasingly hard to find. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Because I am out of questions right now, which means we're going to finish about 4 minutes early. So I'd like to give our panelists a big hand and thank you very much for showing up today.